There are two breeds of silent daughters in any family: the ones who are quiet because they are obedient, and the ones who are quiet because they are keeping score. Parents almost never know the difference until the morning their daughter places a document on the table, and they realize, with chilling clarity, exactly which type they raised. I am Quinn Everett. I had just turned 18, and at 9:02 the next morning, my mother pushed a manila envelope across our kitchen counter as if it were part of the place setting. She smiled and said, "Sweetheart, we need to have a serious conversation about that inheritance." My blood turned to ice. She had no idea that I was already 3 steps ahead of her. Before I take you back to that kitchen, please hit like and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel grow. Drop your city and the current time in the comments below. I promise I read every single one. Let me rewind 6 months to a Tuesday in October, which is when my family began to learn exactly what kind of daughter they had been raising. It was one of those October afternoons where the streetlights flicker on by 5 p.m. I was straightening my room and noticed my grandfather's old cedar chest on the top shelf. He had given it to me for my 17th birthday, which was the last present he ever handed me in person. I hadn't opened it in nearly a year. The hinges made a soft sound as I lifted the lid. Inside lay a dried maple leaf from the yard behind his old farmhouse, a faded photograph of him and my grandmother at their anniversary dinner, and a sealed white envelope. On the front, in his steady cursive, were the words, "Open only if you feel something is wrong with your mother before your 18th birthday. Then, call David Caldwell without delay." I sat on the edge of my mattress, holding that envelope. I didn't tear it open right away. I just gripped it and stared at his handwriting until it became a blur. Grandpa had been gone for 1.5 years, yet he had known enough to plant a warning inside that wooden box, hoping I would discover it when the time was right. Downstairs, I heard paper rustling, the slow, deliberate sound of documents being folded and sorted. My mother's voice was low, and Mark's voice was even lower. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. I tucked the envelope back into the chest and closed the lid. You don't have to yell to win, you file the paperwork. I went downstairs, poured myself a glass of water, and said nothing about the kitchen light being on at 10:30 p.m. when my mother was supposed to be asleep. Looking back now, that unopened letter was the first real weapon anyone had ever handed me. I simply didn't recognize it for what it was yet. I didn't open it that night. I should have. My father, Gregory Everett, passed away when I was 10 years old. He drove a silver Ford Ranger, and one foggy November morning in 2018, he never returned from a delivery run on Route 30. A semi-truck, thick fog, and a state trooper standing at our front door with his hat in his hands. My mother cried for exactly 1 week. Then she started browsing real estate listings for a house with a better kitchen. She remarried in 2020 to Mark Hollis, a contractor with a booming voice, and a daughter from his first marriage named Skylar, who is 2 years younger than me. She moved into the bedroom directly across the hall. I learned 3 essential truths very quickly. 1. My mother punished displays of sadness. If I cried, she labeled it as overdramatic, sighed heavily, and retreated to the porch with her wine. 2. She punished displays of happiness. If I laughed too loudly, she called it showing off, narrowed her eyes, and reminded me to use my indoor voice. The only acceptable emotional state in that house was flat. So, I went flat. I learned to be quiet. By 12, I had stopped spending my feelings around her entirely. I reserved them for the safety of my grandmother Margaret's porch, the warmth of my grandfather's tomato garden, and the pages of novels where characters were allowed to experience things out loud. My mother misinterpreted my silence as compliance. It was not. Silence, for me, meant I was observing. It meant I was cataloging everything. In our household, feelings were currency, and I had stopped spending mine at age 12. My mother called it quiet. I called it survival. Quiet meant I was remembering. 8 years later, she would slide that manila envelope across the kitchen table and finally learn just how much I had been recording. But I am getting ahead of myself. Dinner at the Hollis household was a rigidly scheduled affair. 6:30 p.m. Mark would enter through the garage, kick off his boots in the laundry room, and the air would fill with the scent of construction dust and truck upholstery. He would drop his keys on the counter, and they would land with a loud clatter. He'd complain about a client who backed out, or a job site that had mold issues. My mother would have his wine poured before he could ask for it. Skylar would chatter on endlessly about her day. One Sunday in March, Skylar had just received her admission email from Bucknell. Early decision, $65,000 a year, not including books. Mark raised his glass and toasted. That's my girl. My mother touched Skylar's wrist and assured her they would figure out the financial details. Skylar glanced at me. I was cutting my chicken into small, even pieces. I didn't look up. I simply announced that I had received my acceptance from Penn State's main campus the previous day. A heavy silence descended. My mother said, "That's nice, honey," Mark grunted, and took a long swallow of wine, muttering about how college was a scam and that real money was in trades. He didn't look at me. My mother smiled her charity event smile and told me we would talk about my future closer to your birthday. That phrase again. Closer to your birthday. She had used it 3 times in February and twice already in March. It didn't sound like a celebration. It sounded like a deadline. Mark topped off his glass and added, with a casualness that felt staged, that family money should stay with family, not rot in some lawyer's vault. My mother shot him a look so fast, I almost missed it. The kind that commanded silence. I continued cutting my chicken, paying rapt attention. My grandmother Margaret died when I was 14. She fought breast cancer twice. The second time it fought back harder. I held her hand the afternoon she passed. She told me I was a good girl and not to let anyone tell me otherwise. I didn't cry in the hospital. I waited until I was in the passenger seat of Grandpa's Buick in the parking lot. He didn't shush me or sigh. He simply said, "Let it out, Peanut, let it all out." Grandpa Harold held on for 2 more years. He grew quieter, but not sadder. Quieter, like a house settling at dusk. The summer I turned 16, I moved into his spare room for July and August. I read to him from the chair by the window, watered his tomato plants, and cooked his eggs exactly the way he liked them. He died on a Tuesday in September. At his funeral, my mother wore navy and cried at the appropriate volume. Mark stood in the back, checking his phone. The will was read 2 weeks later. There was a trust, with my name on it, containing a number that made Mark's jaw go slack, roughly $680,000, a mix of blue-chip shares, some cash, and the proceeds from a small property Grandpa had sold. The terms were straightforward. The assets were mine. I couldn't touch the principal until my 18th birthday, at which point full beneficial ownership would transfer. The trustee was named David Caldwell. Grandpa's written note inside the folder contained just 6 words: your choice, Your life. Love. Grandpa. My mother read those 6 words with a look I had never seen on her face before. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't pride. It was calculation. Grandpa had left me a door. My mother had already hired a locksmith. 6 months before my 18th birthday, a man in a gray suit began appearing at our house. Every Wednesday at 4:30 p.m., the same charcoal Lexus with an ugly license plate frame reading Briggs and Associates. He would stay for about an hour and 15 minutes, leaving with a leather binder tucked under his arm. My mother's explanation for his visits changed weekly: an insurance agent, a financial planner, a friend of Mark's. The story kept shifting, but his binder never did. One afternoon in January, I came home early from the library because a snowstorm was predicted. I pushed through the mudroom door and heard papers shuffling on the kitchen table. I stopped in my tracks. I heard my mother say that once I signed, the rest was just procedural paperwork. Mark asked, "And if she hesitates?" My mother laughed, a short, dry sound. "Quinn will sign. She always does." I stood there in the mudroom, my pulse thrumming in my ears. Then I opened the door loudly and called out, "Mom, I'm home early." I heard the frantic sweep of papers being gathered. When I entered the kitchen, the table was spotless. My mother was smiling and offered me hot cocoa. I said, "Sure," on the counter, partially hidden under her purse. The corner of a cream-colored folder was visible, embossed with the letterhead of Briggs and Associates. Skylar walked in behind me and asked if that was about my money. My mother's smile remained fixed. Mark told Skylar to go upstairs. My mother handed me my cocoa and called me a good girl. I took the mug and went upstairs. That was the exact moment I stopped being the daughter who didn't know. I just didn't let anyone know I had crossed that line. I opened the envelope that Friday. I walked to Willow Creek Park, the envelope tucked inside my hoodie pocket. The swings were empty, and the sky was the color of wet pavement. I sat on a cold bench and slit the seal with my thumbnail. The letter was 1 page, in Grandpa's handwriting. "Peanut, if you're reading this, something is wrong with your mother. I've suspected it for years. I never wanted to turn you against her, but I couldn't leave without giving you a way out. David Caldwell has been my attorney for 30 years. He knows everything. He's waiting for your call. You have the right to protect yourself. You have the right to choose. I trust you will choose wisely. Love, Grandpa." Below, in careful block letters, was a phone number. I stared at it for a long time. My hands were cold. My eyes were dry. I took out my phone and dialed. A woman answered, "Caldwell Estate Law." I said, "Hi, this is Quinn Everett. My grandfather was Harold Everett. He told me to call Mr. Caldwell." There was a brief pause. Then a warm, baritone voice, "Quinn, this is David Caldwell. I've been expecting your call." I couldn't speak for a moment. He continued, "Your grandfather and I discussed this possibility many times. I'm glad you reached out. Can you come to Lancaster next week? Tell your mother it's a college aid meeting." I said yes. He said, "Good. And Quinn, don't change a thing at home. Not your expression, not your routine, not a single word." For the first time in years, someone believed I could handle the truth. Caldwell's office was on the 2nd floor of a brick building on Prince Street. It had a green banker's lamp on his desk, shelves of Pennsylvania statute books, and a plant that clearly needed more water. He stood up when I walked in. He looked to be around 65, with white hair and kind eyes, wearing a suit that had probably been tailored decades ago. He offered me tea, but I asked for water. He walked me through everything slowly, using plain language. He wrote terms on a legal pad so I could see them clearly: trust, beneficial interest, fiduciary duty, spendthrift, irrevocable. He explained that at midnight on my 18th birthday, the assets would legally be mine. I had options: keep the current trust, dissolve it, or move everything into a new structure of my own design. He recommended a new, irrevocable trust with a professional corporate trustee. I would be the sole beneficiary. Distributions would be covered for education, housing, and medical expenses. He specifically noted that my mother, Mark, and Skylar would be permanently excluded as beneficiaries or trustees. I asked what irrevocable meant. He explained that once signed, not even I could undo it. That was the point. It protected me from outside pressure, including any weak moments of my own. I thought about my mother's hand on my wrist, her smile, and that ominous phrase, "closer to your birthday." I said, "Okay." He nodded. And then his expression grew serious. He told me there was something I needed to know about my mother's attorney. The plant in the corner was dying. The banker's lamp hummed softly. A UPS truck braked at the curb outside. He told me my mother had been working with a man named Lance Briggs, a local estate attorney who had been reprimanded twice by the state bar. He specialized in what the profession politely calls aggressive family planning. I asked what that meant. He said it meant Briggs would draft documents that most ethical attorneys would walk away from. He slid a folder across his desk toward me. I could see the top page upside down. It read, "Everett Family Financial Unification Agreement," with my full legal name in the subheader. He told me a paralegal from Briggs's firm had left for another practice and had sent them drafts she was concerned about. The document was designed to make me a co-trustee with my mother, grant her a durable financial power of attorney, and assign a significant portion of my beneficial interest to a holding company called Hollis Everett Holdings, LLC. The signature line was dated February 28th, 2 months before my birthday, when I was still 17. I looked up. I asked if I would have needed her signature as my guardian. He confirmed that was exactly their plan, to have me sign under maternal authority before the trust released, while I still legally needed her permission. I placed the folder down carefully. My hands were steady. I told him, "Let's build mine." I drove home from Lancaster at the exact speed limit, my hands at 10 and 2. I walked in at 5:30 p.m. My mother was at the stove, stirring something that smelled like her famous Sunday chicken pot pie. She smiled and asked how the college meeting went. I said it went well, and that I had gotten some financial aid paperwork to review. She seemed pleased and invited me to sit down. She set a plate in front of me with 2 scoops of pot pie and a sprig of parsley. She mentioned that for my 18th birthday, she wanted to do something just for the family, a special breakfast with pancakes, just us. I said that sounded lovely. Mark's voice drifted in from the living room, saying something about grown-up stuff. Skylar entered and asked what grown-up stuff. My mother said brightly, "Just family planning." I took a bite of the pot pie. It tasted exactly like my childhood. I even smiled. Caldwell and I met twice more before my birthday. We always used a cover story, a college tour, a financial aid appointment, a library research trip. He was patient and methodical, talking about money as if it were plumbing, not magic, just pipes and valves. We named the new trust together. He suggested most people name trusts after themselves. I said, "The Margaret Trust." He wrote it down without asking why. We built the document piece by piece. The corporate trustee would be Midland Trust Services, a Harrisburg-based firm with a clean 40-year record. The beneficiary was Quinn Marie Everett and her direct biological descendants, if any, in perpetuity. Excluded forever from beneficiary or trustee status were my mother, Mark, and Skylar. Distributions were authorized for tuition, reasonable housing, medical care, and emergency living expenses, all subject to trustee review. There was a spendthrift clause so no creditors could attach, and no one could pressure me into a lump sum withdrawal. Irrevocable. No amendment, no termination, no reversal. Caldwell emphasized that this protected me from them, but also from myself. In a weak moment, 5 years from now, if my mother cried the right tears, I couldn't undo it. I said I understood. I signed the draft in pencil twice to practice. We set the live execution for 12:01 a.m. on April 15, 2026, my birthday. Caldwell set a phone call for 9 a.m. sharp the morning after, on speaker, if I chose. Aunt Beth called me the week after that meeting. She said she had heard from David Caldwell that I was asking questions. I confirmed that I had called him. She said she could guess why. Beth was my father's younger sister, an ICU nurse, 48 years old. She and my dad had been very close. She and my mother had not been. She told me something I should have known years ago. My father had tried to change his will 6 months before his accident. He wanted a trust set up for me with Beth as co-trustee. My mother happened to him. She cried for a week, said it would destroy her trust in him, that it was a betrayal. He caved and left everything to her, the life insurance, the house, everything. I told her I had found the paperwork a month ago. There was a long silence. Then she said, "Honey, you are not the first one she's worked on. You're just the one with a grandfather who planned ahead." She offered me a room at her place if I needed somewhere to go after my birthday. She warned me she had a mean cat named Walter and strong coffee. But I was welcome as long as I wanted. I told her I might take her up on that. The Sunday before my birthday, my mother made pot roast, her traditional something big is coming meal. Mark lit candles. Skylar put her phone face down. Over dinner, I floated a question, casual and curious, in the voice of a daughter seeking guidance. I asked what the difference was between a trust and a family account. My mother lit up like a porch lamp and began explaining that trusts were complicated and could fail if not managed by family. Mark nodded, adding that lawyers drain them with fees. My mother warned about hidden costs and delays. I said that sounded scary. She agreed, saying it was why family accounts worked better, with shared goals and no strangers in the mix. Mark added that family money should stay in family hands, not with some corporate trustee in Harrisburg. The word corporate gave him away. I had never used that word in front of him, neither had she, but Briggs would have. Skylar chimed in, saying our mother had told her the money was supposed to be for all of us. Dead silence. My mother's fork froze mid-air. Mark told Skylar to eat. My mother quickly explained that Skylar meant family is a team. I agreed and complimented the roast, keeping my face perfectly neutral. In my head, I was taking notes. Skylar knew the shape of it. At least the edges. My mother had told her enough to ensure her cooperation on a certain morning in April, 4 days to go. 2 days before my birthday, my mother announced an early celebration dinner at Willow Creek Country Club. I hadn't agreed to it. 15 people were invited, the pastor and his wife, Mark's business partner, 2 neighbors, and my mother's women's circle co-chair. Skylar wore a pink dress, and Mark wore a navy blazer. The private room had green wallpaper and a chandelier the size of a small car. The waiters wore white gloves. My mother stood up during dessert and tapped her wine glass with a butter knife. She proposed a toast to her brave girl who was going to make such smart decisions tomorrow. 15 people lifted their glasses. I lifted mine and smiled. Mark caught my eye from across the table, tipped his wine toward me, and mouthed, "Big day." I smiled back. 3 tables over, a man in a navy blazer was eating a Caesar salad alone. He was mid-50s, with thinning hair and a ring with a stone too large for his finger. A leather briefcase leaned against his chair. He looked up, looked at Mark, and gave a small professional nod. Mark nodded back. I didn't know the man's face yet, but I knew the briefcase and the posture of a man who charged by the hour. Lance Briggs was already at my birthday dinner, one day early. Pastor Lowry raised his glass and said something kind about my late grandfather. I smiled and thanked him. Grandpa had said, "Your choice, your life." I raised my glass to the whole room. April 15th, 2026, 11:47 p.m. My bedroom door was locked. My laptop was open. 3 sharpened pencils sat on my desk. I was wearing pajamas, a gray top, plaid pants, slippers. I wanted my signature to come from the version of me who slept in this house every night. At 11:52, Caldwell joined the Zoom. White hair, blue tie, the green banker's lamp behind him. At 11:54, a woman from Midland Trust Services joined. Her name was Priya Desai. She wished me a happy almost birthday. At 11:56, the online notary joined. Camera on. ID check completed. 11:59. Caldwell asked if I was ready. I said yes. The cursor blinked in the signature field, 12 though. I typed my legal name, Quinn Marie Everett, slowly and deliberately. The notary confirmed, Priya confirmed. At 12:02, the system requested confirmation of the asset transfer authorization. I clicked approve. At 12:03, Priya said, initiating wire. At 12:04, she confirmed that funds had been received. $681,412.90. The Margaret Trust was funded, fully executed, and irrevocable. Caldwell looked into the camera and said, "Happy birthday, Miss Everett. The world is yours now." I realized I had been holding my breath for nearly a minute. I let it out. I thanked him. He told me to sleep if I could, and that he would call at 9 a.m. The 3 of them dropped off, and the Zoom window went quiet. I closed my laptop and sat for a moment. For the first time in 6 months, I was genuinely tired. I lay down and slept. Let me pause here for a second. If someone in your family has ever asked you to sign something you didn't fully understand, drop the word "rooted" in the comments. I want to know how many of us there are. I read every comment later tonight, I promise. Because what comes next isn't the ending. I still had to go downstairs the next morning. I still had to sit across from the woman who had spent 4 months drafting papers about me, and she still thought she was going to win. 30 a.m., April 16th. I was awake before my alarm. I showered, dried my hair halfway, and put on a cashmere cardigan the color of early butter, jeans, my grandmother's gold stud earrings, and no makeup. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror and said out loud, "Quiet daughter." I looked like her. I went downstairs at 7:45. The kitchen smelled like pancakes. My mother was at the stove in her pink quilted robe. She turned and beamed, wishing me a happy 18th birthday. She wrapped me in a hug that lasted 3 seconds longer than usual. She smelled like Estee Lauder and bacon grease. Mark was at the table in a polo. Skylar was in pajamas with her phone propped against the orange juice pitcher. A manila folder sat on the table to the right of my mother's place setting, not hidden. 3 pancakes were stacked on a plate in front of my seat. My mother told me to sit and had Mark light 3 thin birthday candles. She told me to make a wish. I leaned over the plate and thought, I wish for my grandfather to know. I blew the candles out. My mother clapped. Skylar gave a subdued cheer. Mark commented on me being 18. I said the pancakes smelled great and took my fork. The folder caught the morning light. I let her wait while I took 2 bites. Then she folded her hands on the table and used her warm, women's circle voice. She said, "Honey, now that you're 18, there's something we need to discuss. That inheritance from Grandpa." I set my fork down and said okay. She slid the folder across the table. It stopped against my plate. She said it was just some family paperwork the attorney had drawn up to help us all be smart for the family. Mark added that it was nothing crazy, just structure. I looked at the cover. It read Everett Family Financial Unification Agreement. My name was the principal, with my mother listed as successor co-trustee and Mark as attorney-in-fact. My signature line was already printed below. I flipped past the cover to pages about durable financial power of attorney and assignment of partial beneficial interest to Hollis Everett Holdings, LLC. My blood ran cold, but I kept my face even. I turned to the footer. It was generated December 14th, 2025, 4 months ago. My mother insisted it was just a template. I pointed out that templates don't include a person's full middle name. She fumbled, claiming they had been planning my future for months. Mark's voice lost its warmth. He told me to just sign the pages. I calmly mentioned that his lawyer's name, Lance Briggs, was on the letterhead and that I had seen him at the country club. Skylar breathed in sharply. My mother tried again with the wounded voice, claiming this was for my protection from sharks. I said I hadn't said no. I just wanted to understand. Then I asked to have our family attorney on the line to explain it. I said the word "our" gently. That was the word that broke her smile. Her eyes flickered with panic. She insisted we didn't need Caldwell. I waited, letting the silence work. I said, "Mom, I never told you who our family attorney was." The kitchen went quiet. Mark snapped at me. Skylar asked who Caldwell was. My mother's knuckles were white as she gripped the table. She claimed she had asked around when Grandpa died. I asked when she had asked. She didn't answer. Mark half stood and told me not to answer the phone. I told him I was going to. He shouted for me to sit down. I calmly reminded him I was already sitting. I said Caldwell was our family attorney, had represented Grandpa for 30 years, and had a right to be heard. My phone buzzed. The screen lit up with David Caldwell's name. The time was 9:03 a.m. My mother's face drained of color. I hit the speaker icon and set the phone on the table. Caldwell's calm voice filled the kitchen. He said, "Good morning, Quinn. Happy birthday. I hope I'm not interrupting breakfast." I said we were just starting a conversation about money. He said it was good timing. Skylar stared at the phone. Mark stared at my mother. My mother stared at the folder. Caldwell confirmed that the asset transfer had completed successfully at 12:04 a.m. The Margaret Trust was fully funded with a corporate trustee. The transaction was irrevocable. My mother's fork clinked against her plate. Mark's hands curled into fists. Skylar whispered, "What?" Caldwell continued, detailing the total amount and the pre-approved distribution for my tuition. Mark demanded to know what trust. Caldwell explained it was named for my late grandmother. My mother said I hadn't. I calmly said I did. Caldwell added that the funds could never be accessed by anyone else, Ever. Mark stood up, but Caldwell advised him to be careful about what he said on an open line. Mark sat back down. I watched my mother's face cycle through disbelief, calculation, fear, and finally, loss. Caldwell mentioned that his office had received a forwarded copy of the draft document package from Briggs & Associates, flagged by a concerned former paralegal. My mother protested that it was protected material, but Caldwell gently corrected her. He identified the document by name and date, noting that it had been drafted while I was still a minor. Skylar whispered, "Oh my God." Mark called it a setup. Caldwell replied that a setup required deception by the accused. I had simply read what was placed in front of me. My mother pleaded with me. I told her to let him finish. Caldwell then outlined the legal reality. The document was unenforceable. The assets were no longer available, and the timing indicated intent to use parental authority. He mentioned the formation of Hollis Everett Holdings, ELC, and that he had filed a formal complaint with the Pennsylvania Disciplinary Board regarding Lance Briggs's role. He said Briggs had been notified yesterday. My mother's hands were shaking. I asked her directly if she had known what he was drafting. She admitted, "Yes, I knew." Skylar made a sound I had never heard before. Mark slammed his palm on the table, making the salt shaker jump. He accused me of doing this behind their backs. I replied that I had done it in front of a licensed attorney at 12:01 a.m. on my 18th birthday under full legal capacity. I pointed out that they had done their work behind my back for 4 months while I was still 17. Mark's face turned purple. He said they had raised me. I reminded him he had moved in when I was 12 and that he had raised Skylar, not me. Caldwell cut in from the speaker, advising Mark to take a breath for the record. Mark stopped. I thanked Caldwell. He welcomed me. I opened the folder to page 9 and read aloud the clause about tuition assistance for Skylar. I looked at them and asked, "So the whole thing was to pay for Skylar's school?" No one answered. I closed the folder, saying I would be keeping it. My mother's tears started, real tears, but I recognized the script. She said, "After everything I've sacrificed for you, Quinn, this is how you repay me?" I told her I had been thinking about the word sacrifice for a long time and that we should revisit it with a mediator present. She refused. Caldwell announced that my Aunt Beth was parked at the end of the driveway. I stood up, picked up the folder and my phone, and thanked my mother for breakfast. I walked to the coat rack, put on my jacket, and stepped into my sneakers. At the front door, I paused. I looked at Skylar. I told her she was 16 and hadn't done this, so she shouldn't carry it. I told her to text me in a year. I opened the door and walked out into the pale April sun. Aunt Beth's Honda Civic was waiting with the engine running. Pause with me again. If you just unclenched your jaw, tap that like button. It helps more than you know. I thought walking out that door was the ending. It was only the beginning of the fallout. I didn't yet know how quickly a small town could decide who the villain was, or how quietly the phone calls would start. My mother wasn't done. Mark wasn't done. And Willow Creek had opinions. Aunt Beth lived in a second-floor apartment on Maple Street in Squirrel Hill. It had a massive fiddle-leaf fig tree, a gray cat named Walter who judged everyone, and a comfortable couch with a quilt. She insisted on shoes off, tea first, shower, then sleep. She told me to block all the incoming calls. My phone had 47 missed calls and 62 texts from my mother, the pastor, family friends, and distant relatives. Beth said the truth is slow, but it eventually puts its shoes on. I blocked 12 numbers, put my phone on airplane mode, drank my tea, and slept for 10 hours. Willow Creek was a town of 9,000 people with 3 churches and 2 opinions on everything. My mother went to First Methodist the following Sunday in Navy, crying during the announcements and suggesting I had left home in a moment of confusion. However, the pastor's wife, who had been at the country club dinner, had heard Mark's big day comment. She didn't offer a hug, she made a phone call. The pastor later suggested my mother step back from the women's circle to focus on reflection. At school, someone shared a screenshot in a group chat, and Skylar became the object of sympathy, not blame. Mark's business began to unravel. A bank called in a past due loan. He had been planning to catch up with new family capital, but that capital was gone. A tow truck came for his F-350 and concrete mixers. He didn't come home. My mother co-signed the second mortgage and ended up calling a different divorce attorney. She filed for separation. Skylar's Bucknell deposit was lost, so she enrolled at Penn State Harrisburg instead. Mark moved out. They couldn't even agree on whose debts were whose. None of this was my doing. I simply declined to be the life raft. Caldwell's complaint against Lance Briggs went to the disciplinary board. A former paralegal gave a sworn statement. 2 other clients came forward. The board suspended Briggs from practicing law for 3 years. The local paper ran a small item, the kind that is read quietly by every attorney in the area. Caldwell forwarded it to me with no subject line. I wrote back, "Thank you." He replied 3 words, "Justice isn't loud." I saved that email. I saved it because it said something I wanted to remember. You don't have to yell to win. You file the paperwork. You let the system work. You let the truth walk slowly toward daylight. Skylar texted me in late May. She said she didn't know my mother wanted all of it. She thought it was just some for her tuition. I waited 3 days to respond. I told her I knew that the planning was my mother's, not hers. She apologized. I said I wasn't angry, but I wasn't available to be around my mother. I promised her coffee in a year when she was 18 and on her own. She wrote back, "Okay, Quinny." She hadn't called me that in years. August came. I packed for Penn State with Beth. We listened to Linda Ronstadt and stopped for grilled cheese. My dorm room smelled like new paint and popcorn. My roommate Maya was loud and instantly hugged me. She said she didn't talk to her mom either. I laughed out loud, actually loud. Beth smiled. We unpacked. She took me to dinner and told me I gave her back someone who looked like her brother around the eyes. She drove away, and I didn't look back. September was a blur of philosophy, constitutional law, and a math class I quietly dropped. I joined a pre-law club where I listened more than I talked. My mother texted in October asking if I was safe. I didn't answer. She texted in November that she missed me. I didn't answer that either. Beth called every Sunday, asking how my heart was. I said it was quiet. She asked if it was good quiet. I said it was the kind of quiet I didn't know existed. She called it peace. I sat with that word for a long time. I had spent my whole childhood being quiet because emotions were expensive, because noise was dangerous. In my dorm room, with Maya humming in the shower and snow hitting the window, I understood for the first time that quiet could just mean quiet. No threat, no penalty. Just the sound of a life I was finally allowed to have. April 15th, 2027. Paterno Library, 4th floor, window seat. I had an organic chemistry exam the next morning. At 11:58 p.m., I opened my laptop and logged into the Margaret Trust quarterly statement. The value was $729,448. Distributions had been issued for tuition, housing, and books. I scrolled to the footer where my grandparents' names were listed in small italics: Harold and Margaret Everett, originators of Corpus. I placed my fingertips on the screen over their names. At 12:01 a.m., exactly 1 year from the moment I had signed my name in a locked bedroom in Willow Creek, I closed my laptop. I sat in the window light. Snow was falling so slowly it looked stopped. I thought about Grandpa's 6 words: your choice, your life. I thought about my mother, and I genuinely hoped she was okay, not in a sentimental way, but the way you hope a stranger on the news is okay. I thought about Skylar and the text she had sent that morning with a photo of her dorm room, and the words, "Coffee in May?" I had written back, "Yes, I'll drive." I gathered my things, walked to the elevator, and rode down alone. Outside, I tilted my face up to the snow, breathed out, and went home. You don't have to yell to win, you file the paperwork. If you made it this far, thank you. I know some of you heard yourselves in this story. Drop one word in the comments, just one. What would you have done at 12:01 a.m.? Signed, waited, or walked? I read every comment. I answer the ones I can. If you want to hear the story about the aunt who waited 10 years to tell me what really happened the night my father changed his will, it's linked in the description below this video. You're not being dramatic, you're just paying attention. See you there.